Genie Plus will soon be no more. Okay, paid FastPass will still be a thing, but very soon we will not be hearing the phrase Genie Plus. Yesterday, Disney surprised us a bit with the announcement that in July, the Genie Plus service will be rebranded and updated with some new features, or better put, old features that they have brought back. And let me note first that what I'm about to describe is for Walt Disney World only. This is Walt Disney World only. These changes to the Genie Plus service, soon to be called Lightning Lane Multipass and Lightning Lane Single Pass, are being implemented right now at Walt Disney World. We will be getting to Disneyland in a minute and what these changes mean for our park. But first, let's summarize how this service will look on July 24th. To reiterate, Genie Plus, or regular Lightning Lane, will be called Lightning Lane Multipass. Individual Lightning Lane will be called Lightning Lane Single Pass. The term Genie Plus will no longer be used in any sort of definition of this service, any promotional items or anything like that. That word is gone. And I believe that this is for two primary reasons. First, because it created confusion. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked by people who are new to Disney parks, let's say. It's been a little while, but you still hear it. What is the difference between Genie Plus and Lightning Lane? And the answer is simply nothing. There is no difference. They are literally and exactly the same thing. When you bought Genie Plus, and by the way, that is the service you were buying. When you go to the app and you log in, you're like, hey, do you want to buy Genie Plus? When you bought Genie Plus, you were actually just buying the ability to reserve a Lightning Lane. So now, Lightning Lane is just Lightning Lane. The difference now is whether or not if you're buying Lightning Lane Multipass. I'm a big fan of Fifth Element, so we'll just leave that out there. There's Lightning Lane Multipass, and there's Lightning Lane Single Pass, which is individual Lightning Lane. And that is, of course, in Florida, Walt Disney World, that is Cosmic Rewind and Tron Light Cycle Run. So that's the first reason. The second reason, I believe, is because they are trying to disassociate from the negative connotations, the negative impressions that people have of the Genie Plus service. That service, that phrase, Genie Plus, has become sort of the single most identifiable point of anger and anxiety between guests and going to the park. There was very little positive attitudes, positive feelings about the Genie Plus service, irrespective of the actual usefulness of the software, of the app, which, by the way, it is useful. You do save time with it, but, well, that's another conversation. We'll get into that. Changing the name of the service, I believe, was Disney's attempt at helping people forget how they felt about Genie Plus in order to stimulate more sales of the FastPass or Lightning Lane line skipping service. For a little while, at least, because eventually all of that anger and resentment that was applied to Genie Plus will just transfer to Lightning Lane on a long enough timeline. And by the way, that distinction, that's not lost on anybody. I'm sure that's not lost on me, you, or Disney, which we'll get to. That means something, and we're going to be coming back around on that part of the conversation later on in the video. That negativity will travel eventually to Lightning Lane Multipass because the service is still a paid service. I do expect the pricing to be the same. I don't think they're going to raise the prices or change any of that. So what you paid for Genie Plus, you're going to pay for Lightning Lane Multipass or Lightning Lane Single Pass. And the basic functionality of that service will still be the same once you're in the parks. The differences in function are going to be in regard to how guests are able to reserve those Lightning Lanes before they visit the park. If you are a guest at a Disney Resort Hotel, a Shades of Green Resort, or Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin hotels, you can purchase Multipass or Single Pass and make a Lightning Lane reservation up to 7 days prior to your check-in. All other guests, including locals or guests not staying at any of the Disney properties, those guests can make a Lightning Lane reservation up to 3 days prior to their park reservation date. At present, all guests right now using the Genie Plus service, they're able to make that Lightning Lane reservation only on the day of their visit. You don't have to actually be in the park, but you have to be at least on the day of your park visit, your reservation. And that, by the way, that feature, that requirement was something that came with the arrival of Genie Plus years ago. It used to be the case pre-COVID, back in the day, when under the FastPass Plus situation at Walt Disney World, guests could previously make advance FastPass reservations. In those days, that was the term used, up to 60 days in advance for Disney resort guests and up to 30 days in advance for everybody else. And that was a pretty important feature for a lot of those guests, visiting Walt Disney World, because Walt Disney World, in large part, is populated by out-of-town guests, people who were coming in for a week or whatever, and they liked being able to plan their trip ahead of time. It was kind of sport. You would hear people talk about this. They as soon as the first days were available, they were on their phones, they were on the website, they were booking their Lightning Lane reservations, they were booking their dining reservations. It was part of the experience, not just of going to Disneyland, but of going to specifically Walt Disney World. Planning your Walt Disney World trip was as much part of the experience as actually being there. So I think it's a great idea that they have restored this feature such that they have. Obviously, it's not 30 days or 60 days anymore, but it is still the ability to plan ahead a little bit, and I think that's great. And that is also something that I've got more to say about, this ability to make reservations in advance, because it does definitely mean something apart from the actual functionality. In fact, that conversation might be more interesting, a more important conversation to have than just the nuts and bolts of the new service. Why? Why is Disney making this decision? Because it means something. Hang on. Let's first talk about Disneyland. It's a Disneyland-focused channel. What does any of this, if anything, have to do with how guests are going to be using Lightning Lane at Disneyland? Pretty much nothing at all. I'm sorry, we're not getting any of that. None of that is going to be happening at Disneyland. None of those features that I just talked about are going to happen at Disneyland. Today and on July 24th, the way that we use Genie Plus or Lightning Lane will be exactly the same as it is before and after. No changes are going to be made to the actual service. There will be a change made on July 24th, and that is they are going to be ditching the name here as well. Genie Plus will no longer be a thing here at Disneyland. Our service will also on July 24th be called Lightning Lane Multipass. Lightning Lane Single Pass. Multipass. Guests will still be able to purchase Lightning Lane Multipass in advance as an add-on to their ticket. When they buy their ticket, they can still purchase it, but they can't make advanced reservations. Reservations for Lightning Lane will only be available to guests the day of their actual park reservation. They will also still not be able to choose what time they return for their Lightning Lane. At Disney World, I didn't mention that actually, but at Disney World, you can, when you make your advanced reservation for Space Mountain, you can pick which time, 9 a.m., noon, 9 p.m., whatever you want. As long as it's available, you can choose which time of day. At Disneyland, it's only whatever's next. You can only pick the next available slot. And that's going to be remaining the case after July 24th as well. Now, why that is because of the aforementioned difference between Walt Disney World and Disneyland. Walt Disney World is comprised mostly, more so, of out-of-town guests who are spending, many, many days in the park and are more attracted to being able to plan a week's time at Disneyland or at Disney World. Whereas here at Disneyland, it's more locals and they're more spontaneous and they just want to experience the park. And so although there are obviously going to be a segment of the guests that visit Disneyland that do want to pre-plan, it's not as high in demand. It's not something that is as high a priority here at Disneyland than it is at Walt Disney World. So those features aren't traveling here. So that's the only change that we're getting here at Disneyland. They're changing the name, but I do feel like still that is some kind of victory. They have struck the name, the symbol of that service, and they've also restored some of the old service, some of that old functionality at Walt Disney World. That's a win. And that brings me back to the question I asked earlier. Why did Disney suddenly find themselves making this change? And what's interesting is that the question that I find myself asking It's not the same question that I would have asked 5 or 10 years ago. Back then, if Disney had made a change like this, we would have been asking, well, what does this mean for guests? What is it? What service, what thing does Disney feel like we're not getting or they want us to have? Today, I didn't even think to ask that question. Today, my first and only instinct was to wonder what this means for Disney. What is Disney getting out of this? Genie Plus was not delivering everything that Disney wanted out of that service. And it is impossible to think anything else. This is so because the Genie Plus service was created purely out of a desire by the Disney company to create more revenue. Not as a guest positive tool, but as a revenue generating tool. And I can say this with absolute certainty, with 100% confidence, because the service that we are paying for is literally the same service that we were not paying for back in 2019. They took a free service, same service we have today, they took that and then they put a price tag on it, $25. So it's not like they offered us something new. As a matter of fact, one could even argue that the Genie Plus service is less than the FastPass Plus service or MaxPass here at Disneyland. In fact, that's probably not, that's not a very difficult conversation or argument to make. It's pretty easy to answer that question. But now that paid service is being changed, and in a positive direction, one that is more similar to the old service. Why? Certainly, if it was performing the way Disney wanted it to, they wouldn't be making any changes at all. They'd be happy. They'd be just like, let's keep this thing going. But they are changing it because it's not working for them, for Disney. And this, you guys, is where we exit the scripted breakdown of these changes and get into more of a jam session about what this could possibly mean. I mean, this does sound an awful lot like the usual kind of stuff that we've been hearing from Disney for the past few years post-COVID. But there could be reasons for optimism. Is this perhaps the first visible chink in that armor? Now, that's where I get optimistic, because what they've done in restoring some of those features is they're not going to do everything. Okay, this is the optimistic part of me. And by the way, again, this is now we're freeform. This is the optimistic part of me thinking they're not going to just, guys, we're going to strike the whole thing. Genie Plus is over. The evil is dead. The evil has been defeated. Everything is going back to a free FastPass type service. And, I hope we're really sorry. We're really sorry we did all that to you guys, and we feel really, really bad about it. We're just going to get rid of it. They're not going to do that. That is never going to happen. But if it was in their thinking that they were going to go in that direction, that's how you start. You start it. You do something small like this. You incrementally restore features in the same way that Disney has been incrementally taking things from us. They don't take everything all at once. They call that boiling the frog. I had a conversation, oh my gosh, 10 years ago, back when it was just paper FastPass. We had, the kiosks in front of all the attractions, and you had to go to each attraction, put in your ticket, and get a FastPass ticket. And the first time we heard this news about some kind of paid service, I said, they're going to boil the frog. They're not going to do everything right away. They're going to do it in stages, and they're going to pay for a little bit here and a little bit there. And then by the end of it, you're going to be like, holy crap, 10 years later, we're paying for everything. And that's exactly where we are right now. They have, that's done. So, but think of it in the reverse terms. They're not going to just undo all of that all at once, because A, that is a huge hit on their financial bottom line. In an era where Disney is still hyper-focused on those quarterly reports and trying to get a win, however possible, out of every quarterly report to show that they're still doing great. Investors were fine. Everything's fine. Look at these numbers. Look at how well the Disney parks are doing. We're still making money. We're still doing great. You take things out like annual passes. You take things out like Genie Plus, because Genie Plus, when they first started selling that, was a huge hit to the bottom line when it first happened, because that was brand new revenue that wasn't being created anywhere else in the park. It was pure profit, and went smack dab onto the spreadsheet, and everybody was victorious. But one of the things that we mentioned back then, this is kind of a tangent to that conversation. One of the things we observed immediately is that, sure, they're going to get $25 out of us, but on a longer timeline, they're going to lose that $25 somewhere else in the park. You cannot just stack these expenses on guests and expect them to just keep paying more and more and more. It's a bargain. Guests who want to buy Genie Plus. Not all guests. Some guests, they don't care. They'll spend whatever it takes. But other guests are going to make a bargain. They're going to say, okay, today we buy that Genie Plus, but we're not going to buy a t-shirt or a hat. We're going to bring our lunch or something like that. I would say the majority of guests are going to do that kind of thing. It is only the super affluent, the people who have lots of disposable income, or the people who are just in for a penny, in for a pound, I give up. That's actually what Disney's hoping for. That's a literal strategy on the part of the Disney company, is for people to just surrender and just accept it, and just like it is what it is, and that's what they're hoping for. The reservation system is one of those things where they make it such a part of your life that you just give up fighting. I haven't given up yet, but some people just accept the reservation system. They even believe that it's for our benefit. That's another conversation. So when it comes to unwinding Genie Plus, because I believe they want to, not because they're kind and generous and they don't want us to pay for it anymore, but because it's actually bad for business. It's bad for the bottom line. It creates more friction. It reduces people's desire to spend money in the park. In many cases, notwithstanding, as I mentioned, the affluent, the elite, or the people who have just given up hope, it actually reduces people's desire to spend money in the park. It's costing them more than it's making them. And not just the obvious things like that, not just the obvious, they're spending $25 here, so they're not spending it there. All of this conversation, all of this negativity towards Genie Plus has also affected people's just bottom line desires about whether or not they want to go to Disneyland. It is no longer thought of as a slam dunk, an easy yes. There are things about their choices that they've made, the reservation system and Genie Plus, that kind of thing, that has dissuaded guests from wanting to go to Disneyland. So there's the obvious, we're spending $25 here, so we're not going to spend $25 there. There's that obvious part. And then there's the not so obvious long-term effect of Genie Plus and the reservation system. Not to mention that it is no longer the obvious financial victory that it was when it first happened. As I mentioned, when Genie Plus first came on board, they were going up against quarters, financial periods, year-over-year numbers that did not have Genie Plus sales. It was FastPass was free, so it was pure profit. That's no longer the case. They are now going up against previous quarters, previous years, where they are competing against other financial periods that did sell Genie Plus. And this was something that we talked about. That's another point that we made a couple years ago when this conversation first started happening, is wait till they start, wait a couple years. This is a long game. This is a long-term game. Wait a couple years and see how much victory this really is when they start competing against other Genie Plus years. And you would probably ask at that point, if it was so obvious to us and to most of the people, why do they continue doing it? Well, they did know, positive, that they were aware of that, the ramifications of that, but they needed to make that money now, at that moment in 2021 or whatever year it was. They had to make that money right then, and they were willing to pay that price today. They were willing to pay the price for that victory today, to their detriment years later. This was the impact of Genie Plus, or the impact of monetizing FastPass, has been studied for decades, going all the way back to when they first came up with this idea back in the 90s. Obviously, this is not new territory, by the way, for those For those of you who are like, what has Disney become? It's not like it used to be. They were always like this, but they were smarter about it back in the day. The Disney has been known as the evil empire for decades, you guys, decades. This is not a new thing. Business, this is it's just every business is like this. Every business goes through thought processes and challenges and things like this. It's not just a Disney thing. So in that way, that's why I'm more patient, by the way. Again, we're free-forming this. That's why I'm more patient with Disney when it comes to the poor decisions that they make, because I know it's not like Disney's the only company doing this kind of thing. It's standard operating procedure. And it has been that way at Disney for a long time. Getting back to that point, they developed FastPass, 30 years ago or however long it's been. And that conversation immediately happened. Can we make money from this? And they did a study. Studies were done. And the people who were really smart at the time, and Disney listened to the really smart people back then. And they thought much longer. They thought big picture back then. They thought 30 years, 40 years, 50 years into the future. Whereas today, they're just thinking about the next quarterly report. The guy said, yeah, you're going to get a short-term victory, but in the long term, it's going to have a negative impact on how people perceive the brand, how people perceive the company, and not to mention, as we already said, it's going to, the financial win isn't so big, the victory that you have isn't so big that it can overcome all of that. Yes, you might make more money, but it's going to cost you in other places. If Disney knew all this, why did they do it? Well, as I mentioned, they wanted that victory right now. But also, they're really slow. Disney is notoriously slow to react in a lot of ways. That's why Disney has always been a follower and not a leader when it comes to things like this. Look at what they're doing, for example, with Oogie Boogie. This is something we noticed yesterday. There was so much demand for Oogie Boogie tickets last year that they sold out immediately, notwithstanding the conversation about scalpers or resellers. They increased the inventory of Oogie Boogie tickets, and now I feel like the demand is gone. It's too late. They've overcorrected too late. That's a Disney thing. They are very slow to react, and partly that is that's good, because you don't want a company that is just changing their mind, changing their directions with the wind. That if they don't like, they completely pivot. Theme park business is just incredibly difficult to run, and you can't just be changing your mind left and right under the most nominal conditions. You want to be positive. You want to give it a real solid go before you give up on it. So that's what I think that they have been doing. I'm hoping, anyway, I hope that that's what's happening right now. I'm hoping that that's what this is them finally getting to that point where they're going to start unwinding, which goes back to that part about doing things slowly, bullying the frog, etc., but in the reverse direction, unwinding those decisions. They're not going to do it right away, but I feel like there is room for that conversation at least. We can only hope. We don't know, but this could be considered the beginning of that. We're going to kind of reset the clock a little bit. They're resetting the clock a little bit. Now, if they keep doing that, if let's say, in 6 months from now, they change from 7 days to 21 days or something like that, or gosh, I don't know. One thing I can say for sure is that we will not be going back to a paper FastPass system. That is absolutely, positively, no chance is that happening. No chance is Disney going to go back to a paper FastPass policy, if only because it's insane to go from a digital solution to an analog one. In this world, everything is going digital. Everything pushes towards digital. They want everything on the phone. There's no going back on that. There's no way they're going back to a physical kiosk in front of an attraction where you put in your ticket. Are you kidding me? Where you put in your ticket, or even if you can make it digital, you go up there and there's a barcode, you show them your thing, you show them your phone in the thing. They're not going to go to that. I mean, there could be room for it, but the overhead on that would probably be incredible. And honestly, I don't think that Disney guests would accept going all the way back to an attraction you want a Space Mountain FastPass, you got to walk back to Space Mountain. That's not going to happen. What they could do, though, oh my gosh, we're riffing. Before pre-COVID, Disney had installed those kiosks. They had installed kiosks out in front of certain attractions in each land, and you could book a FastPass through a digital kiosk. They were doing that. You could just put those all over the park. Set up 15 of those. And you could why not? You could digitally book a FastPass with the app. Open up the app, your barcode, scan, it tells you what is available throughout the park, and you just pick one. There's possibility. Man, I've kind of lost in thought now. I really like the sound of that. That sounds a lot better. And you could still, well, see, that's the problem here at Disneyland. At Walt Disney World, it's a separate conversation. Here at Disneyland, there was MaxPass, and they did find a way to monetize FastPass in that way while still offering the ability to get a free FastPass. But that's, oh man. See, that's the thing. I don't think we can get back to MaxPass. Because the service that you were buying at MaxPass, you weren't paying for the actual FastPass. That's a misconception that a lot of people had then and still have today. When the conversation is, hey, why can't we bring back MaxPass? They were making more money on MaxPass. There was more opt-in with MaxPass than there is with Genie Plus, which is true. More people bought MaxPass than are buying Genie Plus. But what MaxPass was selling you was the digital. They were selling you the ability to book a FastPass with your phone instead of walking to the attraction and getting a paper FastPass. There was a free version, but that required you to physically go to the attraction. And then there was the paid MaxPass that lets you just book it on your phone like you can today. That's the part that I was getting at, I think, before when I got lost in thought, is that there's no way they go back. They can't go back to asking guests to go to the physical location for a free FastPass, even if it's digital. I don't think that can happen. So how do you monetize? You can't. Okay, so the distinction is there's a paid people. That's what people want is a free version of FastPass or Lightning Lane, and there just isn't one. There is no free version because what we were paying for before was the digital, and there's no way they unwind where they make people go analog again. So the only solution to this is to offer some compromise. Knott's Berry Farm does this. They give Magic Key holders one, or their annual pass holders, one free express lane or whatever they call it, fast lane. Would that be is one good enough? It is certainly for me. Certainly that's enough for me. What if they did tiers? Isn't that how they do it in the overseas parks? You could buy them in batches. You could buy a pack of 3 or make everything individual. But not $26, $5. I might buy one or two for $5. If I really, really wanted to ride Matterhorn that day and it was 65 minutes, I'd spend $5. If there was a guy out in front of the Matterhorn on a super busy day, I don't have Genie Plus, and I'm in the park and I want to ride the Matterhorn and the line's going around the mountain. If there's a guy out there saying, "Give me $5 and I'll let you in," absolutely, there's going to be a queue for that guy. Do it a la carte. And that lets everybody get in. You could choose. I don't know. But, okay, I guess the point I'm making through all of this is that there's room for optimism. There's room for the possibility that Disney is trying to find a way to unwind some of the choices that they made. And that, that could include the reservation system ? Because I do still feel like that is a friction point. It is a business talks nonstop about eliminating friction point between no and yes. They want to get you quicker to yes. That's just a common lesson that you learn in business. How quickly can I get you to yes? And you do that by eliminating friction points. That's why mobile order exists. That's why mobile checkout exists. Mobile checkout isn't to make it easier for you. It's to create less friction. Seeing a queue at the in the gift shop, seeing all the manic craziness that's happening in this gift shop, some people just check out and they say, I don't want to do it. But if they got mobile checkout, you can just grab your item, scan it, get the hell out of there. The reservation system is a friction point because people don't want to go through those layers. The true believers do, and a lot of people still do it because there's so little inventory of Disneyland, of theme parks that you have to, but they're losing people incrementally over time. And that's where we are now. We're a couple years into this process post-COVID, and Disney has learned a few lessons, I think. So I'm not saying that it's done. I'm not saying that is what's happening, but it's at least room to be optimistic, and I'm an optimistic guy. I think there's hope. I just hope that Disney listens to the smart people who are telling them that this stuff is a bad idea, and we got to find a way out. We got to find a way out without hitting the bottom line too directly. Give something back. Disney, give something back. You have to give something back. You can't just keep taking. And that's what's been happening. You just keep taking. Got to give something back. That's the thing. That's, again, in terms of business trends, he who gives the most value is going to be the winner. We're not dumb. It may take us a while to catch up, but consumers as a whole are not dumb, and they will make the right choices in the long run. Let us know your thoughts, FreshBaked. That's my riff. The next 6 months to a year, maybe even 2 years, we're going to learn some things. I hope so anyway. Thanks for watching, everybody. We love you. Be safe out there. Be kind to one another. FreshBaked.